Distinguished sponsors, distinguished hosts, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here in Brazil, in Belo Horizonte, and unfortunately I cannot speak Portuguese. That's an apology, but I have listened very, very carefully to all the contributions, and what I have discovered is that we share problems and we also share aspirations. And that is, I think, something that binds us together in Brazil and in Europe, the continent from which I come. Thank you. I'm going to talk about liberalism and the state. I don't have very much time to speak, and I'm going to emphasize that our vision of what reality should be with respect to our relationship with the state is a completely different one to that of conservatives and that of socialists. Okay? The first thing that characterizes liberals is they do not trust the state. Their aim is to keep the state on its toes, to challenge the state. If we don't do that, we get phenomena like Mr. Chavez, we get phenomena like, for instance, the Greek government with its huge deficits. We get all kinds of things, you name it, we've got it. We have to keep the state on its toes. And this is, I think, something we always have to remember. The second thing we have to remember is that our civilization is not built primarily on the things that the state has achieved, but on the things that entrepreneurs have achieved. And this is a very, very important thing we often forget. If we don't have entrepreneurs, multinational companies, the little entrepreneurs in the favelas, in the informal sector, we would have no employment, we would have no wealth, the state would have nothing with which to work. And the basic task of the state is to keep out of the sphere of entrepreneurship. It's not to promote entrepreneurship, it is to allow entrepreneurs to do what they are good at doing. This is an old liberal idea. Liberalism is perhaps the oldest political philosophy we have, and we can go back and look at the skepticism of liberals in the past. And I just mentioned three thinkers here. First of all, John Locke. John Locke. The purpose of government is solely to protect the life, liberty, and property of citizens. Okay, and if we look at the world as liberals, what are our basic values? The previous speaker was talking about our basic values. Individual liberty, it's property, it's entrepreneurship, and very little else. We can describe liberalism perfectly using these three terms. The purpose of government is solely to protect the life, liberty, and property of citizens, nothing else. Think of all the other things that the state does today, and the other things that the state does today contributes to the fact that the protection of life, liberty, and property is sometimes lost sight of. It's sometimes not even done. Okay? We have private security companies. Why? Because the police can't do their job properly. Why is that? Because the state does too much. It cannot focus on what it is good or should be good at doing. Okay, so this is a problem. Okay, Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher. The role of the government is not that of a father. Okay, paternalism. We are free citizens. We know, we trust in individuals' abilities. People can do their own thing. Entrepreneurs in their tens of thousands do their own thing and work and are successful. Some are not successful, but many are successful. Most are successful. Okay, you don't need a father if you have a good entrepreneur. Okay, so the role of the state is not that of a father. Karl Popper, Austrian philosopher, natural scientist of this century. The state is necessary, yes, but its power must be limited. With these three sentences, we actually encapsulate the liberal vision of what the state is and should be, and nothing more. I'll just fast forward a bit. Okay, there is also today a growing realization among liberals that big government and massive spending directly affect freedom and has reached crisis proportions. Okay, we have this with our huge deficits in Europe. You've probably been following the problems of the Eurozone. This is all the problem of big government. Typically in a European country, between 40 and 50% of GDP is organized or affected by government. Okay, and this is a big problem. It also means that only 50% of the economy is in the hands of entrepreneurs, private entrepreneurs. And this is a big problem for liberals. Okay, very important for politics. What are the criteria for politicians with respect to the state? Okay, criteria for deciding yes or no for state action in response to demand. I think there's some very important liberal criteria. Okay, should the government act? The first question we should ask ourselves is, will it limit freedom? The second question, does it undermine property and the rights associated therewith? Remember that every increase in every kind of taxation is actually affecting people's right to control their own property. Okay? Will it harm private enterprise? A lot of state activity actually directly undermines private enterprise. I have examples in Germany where colleagues of mine have lost their business simply because a paragraph in a law has been changed. Very important. Does it take civic initiative into account? Remember that individuals, society, businesses can do a lot of things. We should always remember that in the field of education, initially, for instance, in the country I originally came from, the UK, 80% of people were literate before education became compulsory and became organized by the state. We could have gone on from there and increased private provision of education to 100%. No problem, because 80% were already being looked after by private schools, church schools, schools run by local communities, local entrepreneurs running schools, businessmen, training their workers and even allowing them or training them to read and write. These are the things, these are the realities in the 19th century. Are there alternatives? Another important question. Is the measure sustainable? We know that a lot of social measures have actually led to huge state expenditure. We have to increase taxation more and more, the more that these things are done. I mean, for instance, we have our social welfare system in Germany, originally designed to be relatively small, focused only on people who need social welfare. It's very difficult, however, to frame legislation in such a way. So our welfare costs have exploded. What are the administrative requirements? Okay, and this is also a very big problem, because most legislation needs growth of the bureaucracy. Okay, downsizing the state. Okay, typical liberal policies. Deregulation, very important. Simplification of legislation so that people understand legislation. Privatization. A lot of civic organizations, enterprises and so on, as I said, are able to do what government agencies try to do. Partnerships between public services and private suppliers. Yes, new idea, now being tried, but why not on a much bigger scale? Decentralization. Placing responsibility in the hands of local authorities or local initiatives. Okay, they don't even have to be local authorities. Competition, for instance, tax competition. We have tax competition in Switzerland. It's very good because it keeps the general tax level low. Without tax competition, we don't have this. So there are a number of practical things that you can do. The state and the liberal view of human nature, last few words. We've just come to the last slide. This is it. A lean state is likely to be an effective state in terms of carrying out its core duties. I think that's very, very important to remember. And you remember what the core duties are when you look at John Locke. A lean state trusts in the ability in citizens to look after and organize their own affairs, and in the efficacy of free markets. The freer the markets, the greater the wealth. We know this from plenty of international studies. Markets in which citizens articulate their respective needs and interact almost invariably outperform state actors trying to meet those needs. And finally, non-state actors, including ordinary citizens, are often cleverer than the state. And we have a number of examples. I'll just give you one very small example recently. Lamp bulbs, the traditional kind of lamp bulbs that we have in Europe, are now out of circulation. Okay, the legislation is they may not be sold anymore. Okay, so one clever entrepreneur has now decided to distribute heat bulbs. The same lamp bulbs, but they're now called heat bulbs, and the government, the law cannot do anything about it. Very, very good example of outwitting, outperforming the state. Thank you very, very much.